Okay, we have quick fire questions that come from our listeners. We ask people every week. We tell them who the guest is going to be and ask them to send questions in. You can do that, by the way, if you're listening by emailing them to us at podcasts@politicon.com, or you can send them to us on Twitter or Instagram at Politicon. When people found out you were going to be on this week, Brian, we got a lot more great questions than I normally try to
I'm
get
ready.
to. So I'm going to try to run through a few of them because I think some of them are really interesting and a few of them are just
I'll be pithy
to ask you. So Gianna from Washington, D.C. asks, does Joe Rogan have a point and should the debates be more relevant to people?
The idea of having Rogan moderate doesn't make sense to me because journalists moderate the debates and he's more of a talk show host and entertainer. I think, I can understand why he's very entertaining, but I think, it's a role of journalists to moderate the debates. That said, yes, of course, they should be more relevant, but it's up to the commission, and the commission wants to pick seasoned, experienced journalists who are not going to cause a fuss or cause a stink. They want to pick people who are just going to, ask the questions and stay out of the way. That's what they want. And I think if we want younger moderators, which is sort of the situation maybe times, right? More relevant. What do we say by relevant? If we want people who are more in the pop culture, if we want Oprah or Joe Rogan to moderate, it's going to be up to the commission. And then the question becomes, how do we influence the commission in 2024?
Jorge from Los Angeles asks, who is worse, Hannity or Tucker?
Who says either of them are bad, right? Look, I think with Sean Hannity, you know what you're getting. Pro-Trump propaganda. With Tucker, it's more complicated. He doesn't always just repeat Trump's bullet points. In some ways, I feel like Tucker is rehearsing for 2024. I feel like sometimes when I watch Tucker's show, it's like he's doing a campaign stump speech for the post-Trump years, which is kind of interesting to think about. Maybe he's going to run someday, or he wants to think about how to run. Can I pass?
Okay, I'll take that. No, that's perfectly fine. Jane,
they're different. They're very different.
This one's one that I'm very, very interested in personally. So I'm glad Jane from Tacoma asked it. She said, how much responsibility do news organizations have to set expectations for audiences expecting returns on election night? A little wordy, but I understand what she's asking. How much responsibility?
Oh my goodness.
Do news
so much responsibility.
I think you know what I'm talking about. So
they've earned responsibility and they deserve all that responsibility. And all of us as news consumers need to hold these outlets accountable. At the end of the day, it's the group of the major networks plus the AP and Reuters that make the projections, that make the calls, that tell the country what happened. And I have full confidence in CNN and CBS and then all the big outlets. And I actually have confidence in Fox News in the news side, because they've got some really experienced professionals who know how to do this. Here's my fear about the election. It's that the pro-Trump propagandists like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham.
Well, I think part of her question, or at least my question, I'll get credited to her, is that there has been a lot of discussion about the fact that we may not know the results on election night this year because of so much mail-in voting. And there has been an expectation set by all networks. Tune in tonight, watch our coverage on our fancy new set, and we're going to tell you who won the election tonight as soon as we find out.
Right.
And do the networks have a responsibility in educating voters why they really might not be able to expect that this year?
Yes, and I think that process is already underway, and we're seeing great reporting about why it might take longer. But I think the danger, the X factor is if Trump or his propagandists, if Trump and his allies start to say, we won at 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, there's no evidence for that, then news outlets have to be prepared, frankly, to ignore him or to just mention the lie and then move on to the truth. So that's going to create pressure on Fox, because the highest rated shows on Fox are propaganda shows. They're pro opinion shows. And so will they side with Sean Hannity or will they side with the news division? And hopefully they will side with the news division.
Okay. To that end, Veronica from Houston asks, can Fox News change?
Absolutely. And change can take many forms. I think there needs to be a lot of conservative-driven news coverage in the country. So there needs to be liberal-driven news coverage. So there should be the Nation magazine and Salon, and then there should be Fox News and the Daily Caller. But they need to be journalism-based. They need to be based in reporting, not in rhetoric and repetition and regurgitation of other people's news. What Fox needs is more reporters, more journalists. Go out and cover the news. And my goodness, go ahead, cover it from a right-wing perspective. That's great. Go write stories that you feel like MSNBC is not writing. The problem is they are not investing in news. They're investing in talking heads, people who just opine on the news.
Is there not danger in that sort of selection process? You mentioned, for example, the stories that you've seen about the rioting and the dangers in New York. Listen, I've been in New York since the pandemic started. I know that the parts of town that I went into, granted, I had to be quarantined for 2 weeks, so I was not out for much of it. But the times that I did go out, I was able to see that New York was as safe as it had been in the 5 years that I lived there prior. So but there are certainly pockets and areas and places where there were problems, and maybe there might still be a little bit.
Yeah.
If a right-wing organization, if a right-wing news agency is only reporting about those pockets and not talking about the safety, or if a left-wing news organization is only talking about the safe parts of New York and not mentioning the parts where there have been trouble, they're both telling the truth, aren't they? I mean, they're not lying. They're telling you journalistically true stories. They're just not giving you the whole picture. So what's the difference between telling lies and then just not giving you everything?
That's a great point. It's about there's truth, and then things can be slanted and still true. And we see lots of that. But I'd rather have more of that than just people bitching and moaning on TV, just ranting and raving without even trying to do the reporting.
Hey, I'm Clay Aiken. To hear the full episode, subscribe to This Politicon podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to pods. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. Go to Politicon.com, follow @Politicon on social media, and listen to a new pod episode of How the Heck every Thursday.